I sold my house to help my daughter start her dream. A month later, she stopped answering my calls. At first, I thought she was just busy, that maybe the new business had taken off. But weeks became months, and silence settled like dust on a closed piano. The sound of her voice faded in my memory until it felt like something I had imagined. Years later, the day she knocked on my door again, she did not recognize the house. When she realized who owned it now, her face said everything words could not. That was the moment I understood what justice feels like when it finally breathes. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 69 years old, a retired English teacher from Cedar Falls, Iowa. I spent 40 years teaching other people's children how to find meaning in stories while quietly losing my own. When my husband passed away, my daughter Claire became my reason to keep moving. She was bright, bold, convinced that the world would one day know her name. I believed it too. I still remember her sitting at the kitchen table sketching dresses, humming to herself, sunlight cutting through her hair like gold. That kitchen, that house, it was more than walls. It was the map of every version of us that ever existed. I kept the house after my husband died. It needed work, but it was solid, the kind of place where you knew every creak by heart. The porch light had outlasted 4 storms and 1 heartbreak. I always said I'd die there, surrounded by the sound of my daughter's laughter. Funny how life has a way of erasing the things you swear are permanent. The call came on a rainy afternoon. Claire's voice trembled in a way that twisted something in my chest. "Mom, I just need a little help," she said. "If I don't pay the suppliers this week, the company's finished." She sounded desperate, small, like the child who once hid behind me during thunder. I asked how much she needed. She said, "All of it." I laughed at first, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, remembering every sacrifice that had brought us there. My late husband working double shifts, me grading papers until my eyes blurred, Claire sleeping under a quilt my mother had sewn. Love doesn't always feel like a gift. Sometimes it feels like a duty carved into your bones. By morning, I had made my decision. Selling the house felt like tearing out a page of scripture. I told the realtor it was time to downsize, pretending the choice was practical. He asked if I wanted to keep any furniture for memory's sake. "Memories travel," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The day I signed the papers, the pen nearly slipped from my hand. When the check cleared, I called Claire and told her, "It's done." She cried on the phone and said, "You won't regret this, Mom. I promise I'll make you proud." For a while, I lived inside that promise. I called her every few days, asking how things were going. She answered less and less, then not at all. I left voicemails that grew shorter, because silence has a way of shrinking you. After 3 months, the number stopped working. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one she had once sketched her dreams on, and realized she had taken more than money. She had taken the illusion that I was still needed. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment at St. Cloud Senior Village. The walls were thin. The air always smelled faintly of bleach and soup. I met women who carried the same invisible wound. They whispered their stories in the laundry room, sons who forgot birthdays, daughters who only called when they needed a loan. We laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because crying in public makes people uncomfortable. Nights were the hardest. I would make tea and look at old photos on my phone, scrolling through moments that now felt borrowed. There was one picture I could never delete. Claire, 8 years old, wearing her father's flannel shirt as a dress, grinning with a missing front tooth. That smile used to light up my world. Now it haunted me. Still, I told myself she'd come back. Mothers always do that. We keep a spare key to hope in our pocket. But hope can be heavy when you're carrying it alone. What I didn't know then was that the house I sold would find its way back to me, not through luck or revenge, but through purpose. What I didn't know was that losing my daughter would teach me how to find myself. If you stay with me, I'll tell you what happened when she finally came to my door again, and how forgiveness doesn't always mean returning what was lost. Sometimes it means choosing yourself for the first time. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing how far these stories travel. I sold my house to help my daughter chase her dream. She said, "Mom, I just need a little help." So I gave her everything, every dollar, every piece of security I had left. A month later, she stopped answering my calls. A year later, her number was disconnected. I thought the silence would kill me. But life has a strange sense of justice. Because years later, she came to my door. And when she saw who owned the house now, she couldn't speak. That moment changed everything. I sold my house to help my daughter chase her dream. She said, "Mom, I just need a little help." So I gave her everything, every dollar, every piece of security I had left. A month later, she stopped answering my calls. A year later, her number was disconnected. I thought the silence would kill me. But life has a strange sense of justice. Because years later, she came to my door. And when she saw who owned the house now, she couldn't speak. That moment changed everything. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 69 years old, a retired English teacher from Cedar Falls, Iowa. I spent decades teaching other people's children to read stories that meant something while my own story quietly fell apart. When my husband died, I promised myself I would never lose the only family I had left, my daughter, Claire. She was everything, smart, creative, stubborn, and loud in all the ways I was not. I used to say she was born running. I just never imagined she would run so far away. Our house in Cedar Falls was modest, but full of life. The walls still smelled faintly of chalk dust and cinnamon. There was a piano in the living room that no one played anymore, though I dusted it every Saturday. On rainy days, Claire used to sit there sketching dresses on napkins, dreaming of her future. That house was where we laughed, fought, cried, healed. Selling it felt like cutting out the heart of who we were. Then came the phone call. Her voice cracked like glass. "Mom, I just need a little help," she said. She explained that her business, a small clothing brand, was collapsing. She needed an investment to survive. "Just for a few months," she said. "I'll pay you back, I promise." She cried, and those tears broke every wall I had built. I told her I would figure something out. I didn't know that promise would cost me almost everything. The next week, I met with a realtor. He asked if I was sure about selling. I smiled the way women do when they've already decided to break their own hearts. "It's only a house," I said. But it wasn't. It was the memory of my late husband building shelves by hand. It was Claire's laughter echoing up the stairs. It was 40 years of my life pressed into one address. The paperwork took less than an hour. When the sale was final, I wired the money to Claire and called to tell her. She cried again. "You'll never regret this, Mom," she said. "I'll make you proud." For weeks, I believed her. I waited for updates, for news, for gratitude. Instead, I got silence. Calls unanswered, messages seen but not replied to. Then the messages stopped delivering altogether. At first, I made excuses. Maybe she was traveling. Maybe she had lost her phone. I told myself the story every mother tells when she cannot accept betrayal, that her child would never truly hurt her. But one morning, I tried to call again and heard the automated voice say the number was no longer in service. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the wall. The quiet in that moment was louder than any scream. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment at St. Cloud Senior Village. The rent was low, the air smelled of disinfectant, and the walls were paper-thin. The women there told stories like mine in the laundry room, folding sheets while confessing heartbreak. One said her son hadn't called in 2 years. Another said her daughter only texted when she needed money. We all laughed because crying made the air too heavy to breathe. Every night I made tea and sat by the window, replaying conversations that no longer existed. I'd think about that phone call, about her saying, "I just need a little help." I wondered if she remembered the nights I worked extra hours so she could take art classes, the mornings I drove her to school in the rain. There's a term for what I lived through, abuse without bruises. You can't show it to anyone, but it leaves marks just the same. I told myself she would come back. Mothers always believe that. Hope becomes a kind of habit. painful, but familiar. I kept her photo on the nightstand, next to the key to the house I no longer owned. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Some part of me believed that if I held on to it, maybe one day the door would open again. What I didn't know then was that the house would return to my life in a way I never could have planned. That I would rebuild more than walls. I would rebuild myself. And when Claire finally came to my door years later, it wouldn't be to save her business. It would be to face the woman she never thought I could become. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing how far these stories travel. Moving into St. Cloud Village felt like stepping into a waiting room where time never got called. The halls smelled of coffee and bleach, and the air carried the hum of televisions left on for company. I told myself it was temporary, that Claire would call soon, that this was just a pause before things went back to normal. But as weeks passed, I realized that hope can be as heavy as grief. It drags behind you until you forget how to walk without it. The apartment was small, one window, one bed, one chair. I unpacked slowly, keeping boxes labeled kitchen, books, memories. I stared at the last one for a long time. Inside were photo albums, Claire's old sketches, birthday cards that said, "Best Mom Ever" in her messy handwriting. I opened one and read, "You're my safe place, Mom." I whispered back, "You were mine too." Then I closed the box and pushed it under the bed. Days turned into quiet routines. Morning walks, small talk in the laundry room, dinners that tasted of resignation. There was a group of women who met in the common area every Thursday to play cards and gossip. They were kind but guarded, like survivors who recognized the same wound in each other. One afternoon, I joined them. Mrs. Langley, 80, said her son had borrowed $10,000 to get back on his feet. That was 3 years ago. "He must be standing real tall by now," she said, and everyone laughed softly. Another woman, June, said her daughter only visited when she needed someone to watch the kids. "They love us when it's convenient," June said, dealing the next hand. I looked at my cards and realized I was holding the same story. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years, "If love has no limits, maybe that's the problem." I stared at the words until they felt real. I had given everything to my daughter because I wanted her to see me as more than just a wallet with a heartbeat. But that's what happens when mothers forget that love needs boundaries. We teach our children how to treat us by what we allow. The next morning, the universe decided to test how much of that lesson I believed. The power went out across the building. Lights flickered, alarms beeped, and somewhere down the hall, someone cursed loudly. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check the fuse box in the laundry room. That's where I met him. Henry Collins was there, tall, silver-haired, with a gentle presence that filled the space before he said a word. He was fiddling with the switches, muttering about outdated wiring. When he saw me, he smiled and said, "Looks like I'm not the only one who hates waiting in the dark." I smiled back, unsure when I last smiled at anyone. He explained that he was a volunteer helping maintain the building and nearby community centers. "I used to be an architect," he said, brushing dust from his hands. "Now I fix small things, houses, people when they let me." I laughed at that. "Do you make house calls for broken hearts too?" "Only if they come with good coffee," he said. That small moment cracked something open. We talked while he checked the wiring, about teaching, architecture, and how silence can weigh more than words. When the power came back on, the room flooded with light, and he said, "See? Everything needs a little attention, not replacement." I didn't know if he was talking about the lights or me. From that day, Henry would stop by sometimes, always with a reason that sounded practical, but never really was. Once to return a book I hadn't lent him, another time to bring extra tomatoes from his garden. He had an easy way of making space for people without taking any. It was strange to feel seen without being used. One Sunday, he invited me to a community meeting. "We're working on restoring old houses for seniors," he said. "You'd be perfect for helping with the outreach and writing parts. You have a teacher's heart." I almost refused. Part of me wanted to stay hidden, small, safe. But there was something in his eyes that reminded me of who I used to be, the woman who believed she could still make a difference. So I said yes. That evening, as I walked back to my apartment, I caught my reflection in the glass door. My hair was silver now, my face softer, but behind the wrinkles, I saw a spark I hadn't seen in years. For the first time since selling my house, I didn't feel like someone waiting to be rescued. I felt like someone beginning again. The first time I walked into the community center with Henry, the smell of fresh paint and sawdust greeted me like an old memory. People of all ages were there, volunteers, retirees, and a few teenagers earning service hours. Everyone carried something, a hammer, a clipboard, or simply good intentions. Henry introduced me as the teacher who knows how to build sentences, which is sometimes harder than building walls. That made people laugh, and I felt warmth rise to my cheeks. The project was called Homes for Hope. Its mission was simple, but powerful: to restore abandoned houses and turn them into safe places for women over 60 who had nowhere else to go. Some had lost everything in divorces. Others had been pushed out by ungrateful children. Their stories felt like mirrors held up to my own. I wasn't there to rescue them. I was one of them. Henry asked if I could help organize the office side of things, writing letters, editing grant proposals, answering calls. I agreed, though my hands trembled the first time I sat at that desk. I hadn't worked in years. But once I started, the rhythm came back. I helped write a donation campaign that raised more money than expected. I drafted thank you letters and training manuals. When one of the younger volunteers asked me to teach her how to write a letter that feels real, I almost cried. I had been invisible for so long. Weeks passed, and I began to look forward to each meeting. Henry and I shared coffee during breaks, our conversations easy, unforced. He told me about his late wife, about the house they built together near the lake, and how he lost it after medical bills drained their savings. "We start over more times than we ever expect to," he said once. I understood every word. One afternoon, he brought a folder and said, "Eleanor, there's a property I'd like your opinion on." I followed him to his truck, and we drove toward Cedar Falls. The town looked both familiar and foreign, like a song I hadn't heard in years, but still knew by heart. When we turned onto Willow Street, my chest tightened. I recognized the curve of the hill, the maple tree by the corner, the mailbox painted blue. The truck slowed, and there it was, my old house. I froze. The front porch had been rebuilt, the paint fresh and bright, but I knew that doorway, that window by the kitchen. My pulse thudded in my ears. Henry looked at me. "I didn't realize," he said softly. "It's mine," I whispered. "Or it used to be." We parked, and he let me walk ahead. I stepped onto the porch like someone approaching a ghost. The air smelled of cedar and rain. The screen door creaked the same way it always had, but inside, the house was transformed. New furniture, soft light, laughter coming from somewhere upstairs. A volunteer walked down holding a box of towels and smiled politely at us. "This house," Henry explained, "was donated to the project last year. We've been using it as a transitional home for women starting over. It's one of our best spaces." I couldn't speak. My throat tightened until the words barely came out. "It's beautiful," I managed to say. "It's full again." Henry nodded. We thought about naming it after someone who understands what it means to lose everything and still give. He turned toward me, eyes kind. "Eleanor, it's yours to manage, if you want it." Tears blurred the world. I stood in the same kitchen where Claire once drew her first dress design, where I used to cook Sunday breakfast, where I had wept the day she disappeared. Now, it was a place for women who had been broken and left behind. Women like me. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'd love that." When we left, I looked back at the house glowing in the late afternoon sun. For the first time since losing it, I didn't feel pain. I felt purpose. The house that once held my family now held something bigger. Dignity, hope, second chances. That night, I sat on my balcony with tea and the kind of silence that heals instead of hurts. I thought about the strange loops of life, how sometimes what you lose finds its way back in a better form. Henry texted to say the board had approved me as the new volunteer coordinator. I smiled, typing back, "Thank you for helping me come home." It wasn't the same house anymore. It was something better, a place that no longer owned my pain but reflected my strength. And deep down, I felt that this story wasn't over. Because one day, that door would open again. And when it did, I'd be ready. Running the house on Willow Street changed everything. I had gone from folding loneliness like laundry to waking up with purpose again. Each morning began with coffee brewing in the kitchen and sunlight spilling across the new oak floors. Women arrived with suitcases and broken hearts, each one carrying a story I could recognize before they even spoke. We helped them settle in, taught them to write resumes, guided them toward independence. The air inside that house felt different, lighter, braver. It was filled with the sound of people starting over, and somehow that sound healed me too. I called it the Haven. Henry said the name suited it, and I liked the way the word felt when spoken aloud. Like safety, but earned. The first few weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and repairs. I learned how to budget, how to mediate conflicts, and how to find beauty in things that weren't perfect anymore. The women laughed easily, cried openly, and treated me not as a director, but as one of them. In truth, I was. Henry visited often, always bringing something: flowers for the porch, tools for the shed, or simply quiet company. One afternoon, he stood beside me while I painted a sign for the entrance. "You know," he said, "when I first saw this house, I thought it needed saving. Turns out it was saving us." I smiled, brushing paint on the final letter. "Maybe it's doing both," I said. Still, there were nights when I thought of Claire. I wondered where she was, if she ever thought of me, if she remembered the smell of pancakes on Saturday mornings. I would look at the bedroom that used to be hers, now filled with soft blankets and books for whoever needed them, and feel the ache rise again. Forgiveness seemed impossible then, but I began to understand that it wasn't for her. It was for me. One evening after the last resident went to bed, I sat on the porch watching the streetlights hum. Henry joined me, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "Do you ever think about what you'd say to her?" he asked gently. I sighed. "Every day. But I don't know if it's anger or grief that talks louder." He nodded. "Both speak the same language. The trick is deciding which one you'll listen to." His words stayed with me. That night, I opened my old journal, the same one from St. Cloud Village, and wrote a letter I never planned to send. "Dear Claire, I don't know where you are. I don't know what broke you enough to break me too, but I want you to know I'm still here. I hope you've learned that love isn't measured by what someone gives up for you, but by what they refuse to lose. I've stopped losing myself. That's how I still love you." When I finished writing, I folded the page and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. For the first time, the silence between us didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. As the months went by, the Haven thrived. We hosted workshops on self-worth, painting classes, and small garden parties where the women laughed without apology. Reporters came to write about us, donors offered help, and soon our waiting list grew. Each success felt like a quiet defiance against the past. One morning, I stood in the garden watering tulips when Henry approached with a letter in his hand. "It came to the center," he said softly. "Addressed to you." The handwriting stopped my breath. It was hers. I held the envelope but didn't open it right away. My fingers trembled as if touching fire. Inside was a single page, neatly folded. "Mom, I heard about what you're doing. I saw a photo online. The house, the women, your smile. I'm not proud of what I did. I thought success would prove something, but it only proved how lost I was. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm trying to be better. I hope you've found peace, even if it's not with me. Love, Claire." The words blurred as I read them again and again. Henry watched quietly. "You don't have to respond," he said. "I know," I whispered. "But I think I already have." I walked into the house and pinned the letter on the office board, among the thank you notes from other women. It belonged there, not as an apology accepted, but as proof that broken things can still make sense in the right light. That night, I stood by the same window where I had once waited for her call. This time I wasn't waiting. I was living. The house glowed behind me, full of laughter and new beginnings. I realized I didn't need her to come back. I had already come home. Spring arrived early that year, painting Cedar Falls in soft gold light. The tulips in the Haven garden bloomed faster than we expected, and so did the women who lived there. They came from different places, each carrying a story that began with loss, but now ended in laughter. I could hear their voices through the open windows, singing along to old songs, teasing one another about who made the best coffee. Every sound was proof that pain could be repurposed. Henry said once that homes remember kindness. I used to think that was poetry. Now I believed it. Every time a woman walked through the door crying and left weeks later standing taller, I felt the house hum with quiet pride. The same walls that had once heard my arguments with Claire now echoed with courage and second chances. It no longer felt like a monument to what I'd lost. It felt alive. One afternoon, while sorting donation receipts, I noticed a new letter on my desk. It had no return address, only my name in familiar handwriting. My heart stuttered. I knew it was from her. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Mom, I'm in Cedar Falls. I'd like to see you if you'll let me. I'll come to the house tomorrow afternoon. If you don't want that, I'll understand." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The last time I'd heard her voice, she was asking for money. Now, she was asking for permission. I showed Henry the letter that evening. He read it quietly, then looked at me. "What do you want to do?" "I want to see her," I said. My voice was calm, but inside me was a storm. "But I don't know if I'm ready." He nodded. "Readiness is a myth. Just promise me one thing. Don't let her take what you've rebuilt." That night, I barely slept. Memories flooded in like old film reels. Claire's first day of school, her graduation, the last hug before she left for college. I thought of the kitchen table where we once dreamed together, the same table now used for staff meetings. I wasn't sure which version of her would walk through the door, the child I raised, or the stranger who had vanished. The next afternoon, I heard footsteps on the porch. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. There she was. Claire stood there, thinner than I remembered, her eyes heavy with exhaustion and regret. Time had softened her beauty, but sharpened her truth. She looked around, confused at first, then overwhelmed. "This place? It's beautiful," she whispered. Her gaze lingered on the walls, the porch, the sign that read, "The Haven." "You're the one who runs this?" "Yes," I said. "This house found its way back to me." She looked down, tears already forming. "I didn't know. I saw an article about you online, and I just—" Her voice broke. "I didn't know how to face you." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was different now, no longer cruel, just honest. I motioned for her to sit on the porch bench. She tried to explain everything. The business had failed. She'd lost her apartment, her friends, her confidence. "I thought if I made enough money, you'd finally be proud of me," she said. "But I ruined everything instead." I listened without interruption. I didn't need to remind her of the years of silence. They were already written in the way her hands trembled. When she finished, I said, "Claire, I never needed you to succeed. I just needed you to stay." Her eyes filled again. "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't undo what I did." "No," I said softly. "You can't, but I can forgive you." She looked at me, startled. "Just like that?" "Forgiveness isn't a gift for you," I said. "It's freedom for me." She nodded slowly, understanding. "Do you think we'll ever be close again?" I smiled gently. "Maybe, but not today. Today, I need you to see the woman I became without you." She looked around again, taking in the laughter from inside, the garden, the warmth. "You built something incredible, Mom." "I rebuilt," I corrected. "From the ruins you left." We sat together in silence. For the first time in years, it wasn't painful. It was full. When she finally stood to leave, she hugged me. It wasn't the desperate grip of guilt, but something softer, acknowledgement. "I'll write to you," she said. "I know," I replied. "And I'll decide when I'm ready to answer." As she walked down the path, Henry appeared at the door. He looked at me, question in his eyes. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly, watching Claire disappear down the street. "Yes," I said. "For the first time in a long while, I really am." I turned back to the house. Inside, the kettle whistled, the garden swayed in the breeze, and the walls seemed to breathe with life. The past had finally loosened its grip. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was home. That night, after Claire left, I sat on the porch until the sky turned violet. The world felt quieter, lighter, like something had finally shifted back into place. Forgiveness does that. It doesn't erase the past. It simply stops it from holding you hostage. I watched the porch light flicker and thought about all the nights I used to sit waiting for her to call. Now, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anything. Inside, the house hummed with the calm of a safe place at rest. The residents were already asleep, their doors cracked just enough to let the light from the hallway spill in. I passed by each one, hearing the soft rhythm of breathing, the proof of new lives in progress. Every room felt like a chapter rewritten, every woman a reminder that endings can become beginnings if we choose them to be. When I reached my room, Henry was waiting by the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You look different," he said. "Do I?" "Peaceful," he said. "That's rarer than happy." I smiled. "It feels strange, Henry. I thought forgiving her would feel like letting her win, but it doesn't. It feels like I finally won myself back." He handed me the tea. "That's what freedom sounds like." We sat for a long while without speaking, the kind of silence that needs no apology. When he finally stood to leave, he said, "Tomorrow we have new residents moving in. You should get some rest, boss." I laughed softly at the word. Boss. I like that. After he left, I sat at my desk and opened my journal again. I wrote, "Forgiveness is not returning to the fire. It's learning you can walk away and still stay warm." Then I turned off the lamp and went to bed. In the days that followed, letters started to arrive from Claire. Short notes at first, updates about therapy, a new job, small steps toward rebuilding her life. I read them all, but I didn't feel pressure to respond. Forgiveness didn't require conversation. It only required peace. When I finally did write back, my note was simple. "I'm glad you're finding your way. Keep walking. I'm walking mine too." By summer, the Haven was thriving. We received a grant that allowed us to expand, and Henry began designing an additional building for classes and workshops. I helped him choose colors for the walls, soft blues and warm whites, the shades of healing. When the paint dried, he handed me a plaque to hang at the entrance. It read, "Dedicated to the women who found home inside themselves." At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the mayor shook my hand and said, "You've done something extraordinary here." I smiled politely, but inside I knew the truth. I hadn't built this place to be extraordinary. I had built it to be enough. Later that evening, when the crowd was gone, I walked through the garden. Fireflies blinked like tiny lanterns. Henry joined me, his sleeves rolled up, his smile easy. "You did it, Eleanor," he said. "We did it," I corrected. He tilted his head. "What will you do now?" I looked toward the house glowing softly behind us. "Keep living, keep forgiving, keep making sure no one here ever feels invisible again." He reached for my hand, not as a question, but as quiet company. We stood there as night settled over Cedar Falls, the house breathing with life around us. I thought of Claire then, not with anger or sadness, but with gratitude. Her betrayal had cracked me open, but through the cracks, the light had found a way in. The next morning, I found a new letter on the porch. It was from Claire again. She wrote, "I passed by the house today. I didn't knock. I just wanted to see it. It's more beautiful than I remembered. I'm glad it's yours again, in the way that matters most." I smiled as I folded the letter and placed it inside my journal. She was right. It was mine again. Not the property, but the peace. The house no longer held ghosts. It held grace. And as the sun rose, I whispered to myself, some stories don't end with a door closing. They end with a woman standing in her own light, finally unafraid to open it again. Autumn came softly that year, laying gold leaves across the front steps of the haven. The air smelled like cinnamon and paint from the new classroom Henry had finished. I spent my mornings at the kitchen table reviewing applications from women who wanted to move in. Every letter told a story that echoed mine. Trust misplaced, dignity lost, the long climb back toward freedom. Sometimes I'd pause halfway through reading and whisper, "You're safe now," even though they couldn't hear me yet. One afternoon, I found Henry outside by the fence, measuring wood for a new garden bench. He had paint on his forearm and sawdust in his hair. "You're supposed to be retired," I teased. He smiled. "I am retired. I just keep forgetting." I poured us lemonade, and we sat together watching the trees shed their leaves. "It's strange," I said. "For years I thought forgiveness was a single moment, a decision you make once. But it's not. It's something you have to practice, over and over, until it stops hurting." Henry nodded. "Pain leaves in layers. You're doing the work." That night, I dreamt of Claire as a child. She was 6, running barefoot through our old backyard, her laughter chasing fireflies. When I woke, I realized I wasn't crying. The memory didn't ache anymore. It glowed. Maybe that's what forgiveness truly is, the ability to remember without bleeding. Days grew shorter. We hosted our first community dinner, tables lined with pumpkins and thrift store candles. The residents cooked recipes from their childhoods, and I stood at the head of the table watching them laugh. For a moment, I saw what healing looked like in motion. Hands passing dishes, voices blending, no one asking for permission to take up space. After dinner, Henry tapped his glass for quiet. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, "to Eleanor, who taught us that sometimes the best way to build a home is to lose one first." The women cheered, and I felt warmth bloom in my chest. When everyone went back to talking, Henry leaned close and whispered, "You saved more lives than you'll ever know." I smiled. "No, Henry. I just gave them a place to remember themselves." Later, after the dishes were done, I walked out onto the porch alone. The night was cool, the kind that wraps around you like an old friend. The street was quiet, except for the hum of crickets. I looked at the house glowing behind me and thought about all the versions of me it had held. The naive mother who sold everything, the woman who survived silence, the one who rebuilt from the ashes. Every version had led here, to this peace. Then headlights appeared at the end of the street. For a heartbeat, my chest tightened. It was instinct, the old fear. But it wasn't Claire this time. It was a delivery truck dropping off supplies for the center. I laughed quietly to myself. For so long, I had lived waiting for her to come back. Now, my world kept moving whether she did or not. Inside the house, laughter erupted from the kitchen. Someone telling a joke, another singing off-key. I realized this was the sound of life continuing, the reward for choosing not to close my heart after it was broken. I whispered a thank you to the universe for not letting me stay bitter, for giving me a second chance to love this world. Before going to bed, I opened my journal again. The last entry read, "Forgiveness is like autumn. You let things fall away, trusting that something new will grow in their place." I added one more line beneath it, "And sometimes the person who comes back isn't the one you lost. It's you." I closed the book and turned off the lamp. Through the window, I could still see the porch light burning softly. It wasn't a signal anymore. It was a promise to myself, to every woman who would ever walk through that door, and to the daughter I had finally released. Winter in Cedar Falls always carried a certain stillness, like the world itself was holding its breath. The trees stood bare, the air crisp enough to sting your cheeks, and the haven looked like a lantern in the snow, warm light glowing through frosted windows. It had been almost a year since Claire first returned to my doorstep. We hadn't seen each other since that day, though letters still arrived every few weeks. Short, careful words. Healing, one sentence at a time. I had learned to read between her lines. The guilt was still there, but so was growth. She had found a job teaching art classes at a youth center, and for her birthday she wrote, I bought my own little apartment. It's not much, but it's mine. When I read that, I smiled. There was a time when the idea of her independence would have hurt, as if moving on without me was another kind of loss. Now it felt like peace, like the universe had finally balanced its books. At the Haven, the season was busy. Winter brought an ache to everyone's bones, but also a closeness. The women decorated the house with garlands, baked too many cookies, and turned the living room into something that looked like joy. They asked about my daughter sometimes, and I told them the truth, that forgiveness is a road you keep walking, even when it's snowing. One evening, after the residents had gone to bed, Henry knocked on my office door. He looked tired but content, carrying a box of paperwork and 2 cups of cocoa. "You've built a miracle here, Eleanor," he said. I smiled. "We built it, you and I." He sat across from me. "The city wants to expand Homes for Hope to 2 more towns. They asked if you'd consider overseeing the new branches." I stared at him. "Me?" He nodded. You've turned pain into purpose better than anyone I know." The idea filled me with both pride and fear. Cedar Falls had become my sanctuary, my safe circle. Expanding meant letting go of some control, trusting others the way I had learned, painfully, to trust myself. "It's a big step," I said softly. Henry smiled. "So was forgiving your daughter." He was right. Every act of courage begins with a small release. I told him I'd think about it. That night, lying in bed, I looked out the window at the falling snow and whispered, "I think I'm ready." A few days later, Claire called. Her number flashed on my phone, and for a heartbeat I hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her voice was careful but steadier than I remembered. "Hi, Claire. I just wanted to say Merry Christmas," she said. "And thank you for not hating me." "I never hated you," I said gently. "I was just learning how to love myself, too." There was a pause, the kind that used to be painful, but now felt like breathing space. "Can I ask something?" she said. "Would you ever let me visit the house again?" I thought for a long moment. "Maybe one day," I said, "when you're ready to see it as what it's become, not what it was." She exhaled softly. "I'd like that. I'll call again soon." After we hung up, I realized I wasn't shaking. The conversation hadn't reopened wounds. It had sealed them. The past no longer felt like an open door I was afraid to close. It felt like a hallway leading forward. That weekend, Henry and I hosted a small New Year's dinner. The house was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of warmth that belongs only to survivors. When the clock struck midnight, everyone shouted and hugged, and Henry turned to me with that patient, steady look. "To new beginnings," he said. I raised my glass. "And to letting go of the old ones." Outside, snow fell quietly, covering the street in soft white light. I looked at the house that had once represented loss and saw only beauty. Each flake that landed on the window melted into something whole again, proof that even cold things can be softened by warmth. In that moment, I understood that the story was never about what Claire took from me. It was about what I learned to give myself. By the time spring returned, I had made my decision. I accepted the offer to help expand Homes for Hope to other towns. The thought of starting again somewhere new didn't frighten me this time. It thrilled me. Henry laughed when I told him. "So the teacher becomes the pioneer," he said. I smiled. Maybe I always was. The first new site was in Davenport, 3 hours away. The city council had donated a row of small cottages that needed more love than money. I spent long days meeting contractors, reviewing designs, and mentoring new volunteers. Every time I walked into one of those broken houses, I could see potential instead of ruin. It was a skill I had earned the hard way. Back in Cedar Falls, the Haven continued to thrive. The women there began to take leadership roles, organizing events, mentoring newcomers, managing the garden. Watching them blossom felt like witnessing a garden plant itself. The place no longer depended on me to breathe. It was alive on its own, exactly as it should be. Henry and I found a comfortable rhythm. We were partners in every sense except the romantic one, though affection sat quietly between us like a shared secret. He'd cook breakfast at the center on Saturdays, humming old jazz tunes while I sorted paperwork. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with that same quiet pride my late husband once had. It didn't hurt. It felt like permission to move forward. Then, one morning, a package arrived at my office. Inside was a small painting, one of Claire's. The note attached read, "Mom, I sold my first piece at the gallery. I wanted you to have this one. Thank you for showing me what starting over looks like." The painting showed a woman standing on a porch surrounded by wildflowers, her face turned toward the sun. I traced the brushstrokes with my fingertips and realized something beautiful. She had painted me. That evening, I hung the painting in the main hallway of the Haven. The residents stopped to admire it, asking about the artist. I told them, someone who learned, like us, that broken things can still be beautiful. Henry helped me mount it properly. When we stepped back to look, he said, "Looks like home, doesn't it?" "Yes," I said quietly. "It does." Weeks passed, and spring turned into summer. I traveled often, meeting new communities, training coordinators, speaking at events about second chances and the courage to build boundaries. I never expected to become a public voice for anything. But when I stood in front of rooms full of strangers and said, "Love without limits can destroy you," people nodded. They understood, because it wasn't just my story, it was theirs too. One afternoon, while packing for another trip, I found Claire's letterbox in my drawer. Every note she'd sent since that first apology was there, neatly folded. I read through them again, noticing how the tone had changed over time, from guilt to gratitude, from apology to sharing small joys. Her last one ended with, "I'm happy, Mom. I hope you are too." I sat for a long while, letting the words settle. Then I took a deep breath and whispered, "I am." That weekend, Claire called again. Her voice was brighter, lighter. "I got accepted to an artist residency in Oregon," she said. "It's the chance of a lifetime." I smiled into the phone. "That sounds wonderful. I just wanted to thank you," she said softly, "for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "You didn't earn it, Claire. But neither did I earn the pain. That's the thing about forgiveness. It isn't a transaction. It's a release." She was quiet for a long time, then said, "You always know how to say things that make sense later." "Then maybe you'll understand this one day," I replied. "I'm proud of you for finding your own way, but I'm proud of me for not waiting for you to find it." We said goodbye without tears, without guilt, just mutual peace. When the call ended, I stood by the window, watching the sunset wash the town in amber light. Somewhere in that glow, I felt both of us, mother and daughter, finally standing on our own feet. The next morning, I packed my suitcase, kissed Henry on the cheek, and locked the door of the Haven behind me. The house would be fine without me now. It was never meant to be mine alone. Driving out of Cedar Falls, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The house stood steady, a quiet witness to everything we had survived. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because the story of what I lost had finally become the story of everything I found. The highway stretched ahead like a silver ribbon, and for the first time in years, I wasn't running from anything. I was driving toward something new. The road to Davenport was lined with wildflowers, the kind that grow without permission, stubborn and bright. I thought about how life had turned me into one of them, something that bloomed again after being stepped on. When I arrived at the new site, I met the local team, a group of young volunteers full of energy but not yet shaped by loss. They called me Miss Eleanor, which made me laugh. I showed them how to write grant requests, how to speak to donors with dignity instead of desperation, how to make every woman who walked through the door feel human again. Teaching again felt like coming home. Each of the small houses in Davenport had its own story. One had been abandoned for years after a family lost it to medical debt. Another had been vandalized, but still stood strong beneath the damage. We worked on them one by one, repairing windows, sanding down old floors, and painting the walls soft yellow. Every nail I hammered felt like an apology to my younger self for ever thinking I was powerless. In the evenings, I stayed at a nearby motel. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet. I would sit by the window writing notes for the new program, sometimes adding reflections to my journal. One night, I wrote, "Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without needing to go back." Henry called often, checking in. "The women here miss your tea," he said once. "They'll survive," I teased. "Teach them how to make it right." "Not possible," he said. "They say it only tastes right when it's yours." His voice carried a comfort I hadn't expected to rely on, and I realized how naturally he had become part of my story. He never filled the space left by my husband. He simply sat beside it quietly, without asking for more than I could give. That kind of companionship was its own form of grace. A few weeks later, while checking emails at the motel, I found one from Claire. The subject line read, "Oregon. Mom, I'm here. It's beautiful. I'm painting every day, and it feels like breathing again. I just wanted to say thank you for teaching me what independence looks like. I think I finally understand why you didn't let me stay that day. You were showing me how to stand on my own. I love you." I read the message twice, smiling through tears I didn't bother to wipe away. For years, I had begged for her to say those words, and now that she had, I realized I didn't need them anymore. Still, they felt like sunlight landing softly on old scars. When the first renovated house in Davenport opened, the ribbon-cutting ceremony was small but beautiful. Women stood holding hands, some crying, some laughing. A local reporter asked if I had any advice for others starting over later in life. I thought for a moment and said, "You can't control who breaks you, but you can decide who helps you heal. Sometimes that person is yourself." After the event, I walked alone through the finished house. The light poured through the kitchen window just like it used to in Cedar Falls. I could almost hear echoes of my past self whispering, "You did it." Driving home that evening, the sky turned pink and the air smelled of rain. I thought about how the story had begun, with a house I sold, a daughter I lost, and a silence that almost swallowed me. Now the silence was gone, replaced by purpose, by peace, by the hum of my own strength. When I arrived back at the Haven, the women were waiting on the porch, cheering like I'd won an award. Henry stood behind them with a grin, holding a bouquet of tulips. "Welcome home," he said. And I was home, not the kind you sign for or sell, but the kind you grow inside your chest, one breath at a time. That night, as I turned out the lights, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for the past, not even for forgiveness anymore, but for gratitude, for survival, for freedom, for love that learned to stand tall. Summer settled over Cedar Falls like a soft sigh. The garden at the Haven exploded with color, tulips, marigolds, wild ivy climbing the porch rails. Life had found its rhythm again. I woke each morning to the hum of sprinklers, the smell of coffee brewing, and laughter from the women in the kitchen. What once had been a house full of ghosts now pulsed with life. Every sound was a reminder. I had survived. I had built something real, and I had done it on my own terms. Henry and I spent most mornings walking to the farmer's market downtown. He always carried the heavier bags, though I argued with him about it. "I'm perfectly capable," I'd say. He'd grin. "I know, but let me pretend you're not." Sometimes we'd pass people who recognized me from the local news article about the Haven. They'd wave or stop to tell me that my story gave them courage. It was strange hearing strangers call me inspiring. I never set out to inspire anyone, I just refused to stay broken. One afternoon, I received another letter from Claire. She wrote that her art residency in Oregon was ending soon, and she'd been invited to stay on as a mentor for younger artists. "It's the first time in my life," she wrote, "that I feel like I belong somewhere for the right reasons." She included a photo of one of her new paintings. It showed a woman standing by a window, sunlight spilling across her face. In her hands, she held a small flower pot with a single green sprout. Beneath it, in tiny letters, Claire had written, "It starts again." I placed the photo on my desk and smiled. That's what healing looked like. Quiet, unglamorous, and deeply human. Later that week, Henry and I hosted a small anniversary dinner to celebrate the Haven's second year. Residents past and present gathered, their laughter filling the house like a hymn. At one point, I stood by the window watching everyone talk and thought, this is what family is supposed to feel like. No demands, no guilt, just shared air, shared kindness. When the evening ended, Henry and I stayed behind to clean up. He washed the dishes while I dried. You ever think about what's next? He asked. I shrugged. Maybe a book. Or maybe I'll finally take that art class the women keep pushing on me. He looked at me, smiling softly. You'd be good at that. You already know how to create beauty out of mess. For a moment, I just watched him. His hair had turned more silver that year, and his hands bore the quiet marks of a life spent building. I felt something gentle stir inside me, an affection that didn't demand or consume. It was the kind of love you could grow old in. That night, after he left, I stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The same sky had watched me through my worst nights, and now through my best ones. I thought of Claire again and wondered if she was looking at the same sky from Oregon. I didn't feel sadness anymore, only connection. Forgiveness had made that possible. I sat on the porch swing, the one Henry had built, and whispered, "We made it, didn't we?" The breeze rustled the garden in answer. The next morning, as I watered the flowers, the mail carrier handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a typed letter with a letterhead from the Homes for Hope Foundation. They wanted me to travel to Washington, D.C. to speak about the project's success and how community rebuilding could heal family trauma. I laughed out loud. Me, a woman who once couldn't find the courage to make a phone call, was being asked to speak in front of senators and philanthropists. When I told Henry, he raised an eyebrow. "You're going to do it, right?" "I'm thinking about it," I said. He smiled. "Don't think too long. The world needs to hear you, Eleanor." I stood there holding the letter, feeling both terrified and proud. The old version of me would have said no out of fear. The woman I had become, the one who learned to turn loss into light, knew the answer already. "Yes," I said finally, "I'll go." The invitation to Washington, D.C. felt surreal at first. Me, Eleanor Brooks, who once sat in a small apartment wondering how to pay rent, was now flying across the country to talk about rebuilding lives. The morning of the flight, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy dress. For the first time in decades, I saw not an old woman, but a whole one. Henry drove me to the airport, his usual calm wrapped in pride. "Promise me you'll tell them the truth," he said as we waited by the departure gate. "What truth is that?" I asked. "That you didn't start Homes for Hope to be a saint. You did it because you were tired of being broken. People need to hear that kind of honesty." I smiled, touched his hand, and said, "I'll tell them." The flight was long, filled with quiet thoughts and clouds that looked like memories, soft, distant, unreachable. When the plane landed, I felt a wave of gratitude. 10 years earlier, I'd been invisible to everyone, including myself. Now, strangers were waiting to listen. The conference took place in a grand hall, all marble floors and high ceilings. I was scheduled as the final speaker. While others talked about policies and funding, I scribbled in my notebook, trying to find my courage. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces, leaders, donors, activists. My heart raced, but then I saw one woman in the front row holding a handkerchief and smiling at me like she already knew my story. That was all I needed. "My name is Eleanor Brooks," I began, "and 5 years ago, I sold my house to help my daughter chase a dream. When she disappeared, I thought I'd lost everything. But sometimes, losing everything is the only way to see what you were never meant to carry." The room went silent. I built Homes for Hope because I needed to believe that love could still mean something after betrayal. I learned that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's strength wearing softness, and home, it isn't an address. It's the moment you stop begging someone else to save you. When I finished, there were tears, standing applause, people hugging strangers beside them. For a moment, the noise blurred into a hum, and I thought, if Claire could see this, she'd finally understand who her mother became. Afterward, a young woman approached me, her eyes wet. "My mom hasn't spoken to me in 3 years," she said. "But hearing you made me want to call her." I squeezed her hand and whispered, "Do it. Even if she doesn't answer, you'll both start healing." That night, I walked back to my hotel room feeling lighter than I ever had. The city sparkled under streetlights, and for the first time, I didn't feel small in a big world. I felt infinite. When I returned to Cedar Falls 2 days later, the women greeted me with cheers and flowers. Henry was waiting near the door, holding the morning paper. The headline read, "Local Woman Brings Hope from Heartbreak." I laughed when I saw my picture beneath it, caught mid-speech, hands open like I was releasing something. Henry grinned. "You're famous now." "I'm just free," I said. He nodded slowly. "That's even better." That evening, we sat in the garden as the sun melted behind the trees. I told him about the woman who wanted to call her mother, about how many people cried when I said forgiveness was freedom. He listened quietly, his eyes warm. "You realize," he said, "you've become what you needed when you were hurting." I looked at him and felt tears form, not of sadness, but of recognition. "Maybe that's what healing really is," I said. "Becoming the person you once prayed would show up." He smiled. "You showed up, Eleanor. For everyone. Including yourself." I leaned back, watching the sky turn indigo, feeling the weight of every moment that led here. The house behind us glowed softly, the same one that had once broken me, now standing as a beacon for others. I realized I didn't just forgive my daughter. I forgave life itself, for not going the way I planned, and for somehow turning out better. Summer faded into a slow, golden autumn again. The air in Cedar Falls felt gentle, the kind of warmth that comes after surviving every storm. The Haven was thriving more than ever. We had waiting lists, donations pouring in, and success stories written on every face that passed through those doors. Sometimes I stood in the hallway, listening to the hum of conversation, and thought, this is what grace sounds like. Henry spent most afternoons fixing things that didn't need fixing. When I teased him about it, he'd smile and say, "I just like knowing everything works." Truth was, we both knew he was preparing the place for the day I might not be there. We didn't talk about that directly, but it lived between us, like the quiet comfort of a shared secret. One crisp October morning, I received an unexpected call. The number had a West Coast area code. My chest tightened. It was Claire. "Mom?" Her voice was stronger now, steadier. "I just wanted you to know I'm coming back to Iowa for a few days. I'll be nearby for an art exhibit in Des Moines. I'd like to visit, if you'd be okay with that." For a moment I couldn't answer. The version of me from years ago would have said yes instantly, desperate for any scrap of connection. But this version of me, the one who had learned peace, paused to think. "Of course, Claire," I said finally. "You're welcome to come by." 2 days later, she arrived. When she stepped out of the car, I barely recognized her. She looked radiant, healthy, confident, the kind of woman I'd always hoped she'd become. She hugged me before I could even open my arms. "You look amazing," she said. "So do you," I replied. And it was true. Time had been kind to both of us in different ways. Inside the house, I gave her a tour. She ran her hand along the staircase railing and smiled. "You brought it all back to life," she whispered. "We brought ourselves back to life," I said. "This house just came along for the ride." In the kitchen, we sat at the table where so many of my memories lived. The conversation came easily. Small updates, old stories, laughter that didn't feel forced. She told me about Oregon, her classes, and a new series she was painting called Roots. "It's about women who had to start over," she said. "I think it's about you, too." Hearing that made something inside me loosen. "I'm proud of you, Claire," I said. She looked at me carefully. "Are you really?" "I always was," I said, even when I didn't know how to say it. Tears welled in her eyes. "I used to think forgiveness meant pretending nothing happened, but seeing you now, I get it. You forgave me, but you didn't let me break you again. That's love, isn't it?" I smiled softly. "That's respect. And yes, maybe that's love too." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for not closing the door forever." I squeezed back. "Thank you for knocking instead of breaking it down." The moment felt like the end of a long storm, the quiet after thunder, when the air smells clean again. Later, as she prepared to leave, she hugged me tight. "You'll come see the exhibit?" she asked. "I will," I promised, "and I'll bring the women from the Haven. We could all use a little art." She laughed through tears. "You really are unstoppable, Mom." When her car pulled away, I stood on the porch watching the dust settle. Henry came up beside me, his hands tucked in his jacket pockets. "How'd it go?" "She's good," I said. "We're good." He nodded. "Told you forgiveness works both ways." I smiled. "You were right again." "You're getting annoying with that." He laughed, and for a moment I let my head rest against his shoulder. The world felt steady, quiet, whole. That night, I walked through the Haven one last time before bed. In the hallway, the painting Claire had sent me still hung proudly, the woman on the porch, sunlight on her face. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "We made it." And I meant we in the widest sense, me, Claire, Henry, every woman who ever walked through these doors, every person who ever believed that broken things can bloom again. The porch light glowed outside, just like it had years ago. Only this time, it wasn't a beacon for someone lost. It was a celebration for someone found. The day of Claire's art exhibit arrived with clear skies and the kind of light that makes everything look forgiven. I drove to Des Moines with two of the women from the Haven, both of whom insisted on baking cookies for the road. Henry packed the car, pretending not to hover. "You sure you don't need me there?" he asked. I smiled. "You've been beside me for every storm. I can stand in the sun on my own." He kissed my forehead and said, "Then go shine." The drive felt peaceful. We played music from the 70s, the kind my husband used to hum while fixing the porch light. I watched the miles pass and thought about how strange it was to be on my way to celebrate my daughter, not because she needed saving, but because she had saved herself. The gallery was bright and full of people. I spotted Claire near the back, greeting guests with the confidence of someone who had learned how to meet the world without apology. When she saw me, her face broke into a smile that reached her eyes. She walked over quickly, her heels clicking against the floor. "You came," she said, her voice trembling with joy. "I told you I would." She hugged me, and this time I didn't feel the weight of history pressing between us. It was just warmth. She introduced me to her friends and fellow artists. "This is my mom," she said proudly. "She's the reason I paint women with light around them." I looked at the canvases lining the walls. The theme of the exhibit was homecoming. Each piece showed women standing in open doorways, light spilling over their faces, their bodies strong and unashamed. One painting stopped me in my tracks. It was the Haven, perfectly captured, right down to the porch swing Henry built. In the window, a small figure stood holding a cup of tea. Me. I turned to her, overwhelmed. "Claire, it's beautiful." She smiled. "It's yours." For a moment, words wouldn't come. Years of silence, regret, and distance all collapsed into that single gesture. She had taken the place that once broke us and turned it into art. I realized she hadn't just healed herself. She'd honored the journey that healed me too. When the event ended, we walked outside into the fading light. The city was alive with laughter and traffic, but it all felt far away. We stood near my car, not wanting to end the moment. "I'll come visit again soon," she said. "Maybe next time I'll stay for a few days, help out at the Haven." I smiled. "That would be nice. The women would love that. Just remember, you're visiting as a volunteer, not as my lost little girl." She laughed softly. "I know. You taught me the difference." We hugged again, this time longer, quieter. It wasn't reconciliation born of guilt. It was understanding born of respect. On the drive home, the women in the car chatted about the paintings, but I stayed silent, holding Claire's gift in my lap. I felt something deep inside settle, like a chapter closing without sadness. When we reached Cedar Falls, night had already fallen. The porch light glowed as always. Henry was waiting, leaning against the railing. "So," he said, "how was it?" "Perfect," I answered simply. "She's finally home, even if she lives miles away." He smiled, eyes soft. "And you?" "I've been home for a while now," I said. He helped me carry the painting inside, hanging it above the mantel. We stood together looking at it, the light spilling from the painted windows, the figure in the reflection. It felt like looking into the truest version of myself. Henry turned to me. "You know, Eleanor, you've turned forgiveness into art too." I laughed quietly. "No, I just learned to stop living in the dark." He took my hand, and for the first time in years, I let someone hold it without fear. The house around us seemed to exhale, full of warmth, of stories, of peace. I thought of all the doors that had closed and opened, all the times I had thought my life was over when it was only beginning again. I thought of Claire, of the women of the Haven, of Henry, of every sunrise I almost missed. And I whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't to anyone in particular. It was to life itself, for bringing me here. The next morning began with quiet sunlight streaming through the curtains and the soft rustle of the garden waking up outside. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at Claire's painting hanging just beyond the window. The woman in the artwork, me, or who I had become, looked calm, strong, and utterly free. For years I had searched for that version of myself in other people's approval. Now she was right here, framed in peace. Claire called later that day. "Did the painting fit on the wall?" she asked. "It did," I said. "It looks like it's always belonged there." "I was thinking," she continued, her voice light, "about doing another piece, this time of the two of us, not the past us, the now us." "That sounds beautiful," I said. "I'd like that." We talked about small things then, her students, the spring weather in Oregon, how the Haven was expanding again. When we hung up, there were no tears, no ache, just warmth. Forgiveness had changed the way her voice sounded in my ears. By afternoon, the house was full again. The women were planting new flowers in the garden, their laughter rising over the hum of a lawnmower down the street. Henry was repairing the mailbox, pretending it needed fixing. "You know, someday we'll run out of things to mend," I said, handing him a glass of lemonade. He smiled. "Then we'll just start building new ones." I laughed. "That's what we've been doing all along, isn't it?" He nodded. "Exactly." That evening, as the sun dipped low, we gathered everyone on the porch. We didn't plan it. It just happened, the way good things often do. Someone brought out a guitar, someone else made tea, and the air filled with song and soft chatter. I looked around at the faces illuminated by the golden light, women who had walked through heartbreak and still learned to laugh. This house had become a living testament that dignity can survive anything. When the music quieted, Henry turned to me. "You ever think about what's next for you?" I smiled. "This is next. All of this." He nodded, satisfied. "Then I'll stop asking." Night settled slowly over Cedar Falls. The porch light flickered on, steady and warm. For years, that light had been a symbol of waiting for Claire to come home, for answers, for forgiveness. But now it meant something else entirely. It meant belonging. It meant peace. Before going inside, I took one last look at the garden. The flowers were still open, stretching toward the moonlight. I thought of the girl Claire used to be, the woman she had become, and the mother I finally learned how to be. Not desperate, not perfect, just whole. In my journal that night, I wrote, "Home is not a place you return to. It's a truth you carry forward. And sometimes the people who broke your heart are the same ones who show you where it beats strongest." I closed the book and set it on the nightstand beside Claire's latest letter. Then I whispered a prayer for her, wherever she was painting, laughing, beginning again. Outside, the porch light kept shining over the Haven. Not as a beacon for someone lost, but as a promise to everyone who finds their way here. That forgiveness can be the start of freedom. And love, real love, always includes yourself. The house was quiet. My heart was full. And as I drifted to sleep, I knew this chapter of my life had reached its ending, not with loss, but with light. When I look back now, I can hardly recognize the woman who once sold her house and her peace in the same breath. I see her sitting at that old kitchen table, clutching her phone, begging for a voice that never came. I wish I could tell her then what I know now, that silence is not always punishment, that sometimes it's the soil where strength grows. The story people know is simple. I sold my house to help my daughter, she disappeared, and years later she came back to find I owned it again. But that's not really the story. The true story is about what happened in between. The slow rebuilding of a soul, the small acts of courage that no one applauds, the moment when forgiveness stopped being a word and became a way of living. I used to think justice meant watching the person who hurt you fall. Now I understand it means watching yourself rise. The day Claire saw me standing on that porch, calm and whole, was the day I no longer needed her to make things right. I had already done that myself. The haven became more than a house. It became a lesson carved into brick and light. Every woman who walks through its doors arrives carrying the weight of what was taken from her, love, trust, dignity, and leaves knowing none of it defines who she is. I see myself in each of them. We are not victims of betrayal. We are architects of rebirth. Claire and I still speak from time to time. We send letters, photos, stories. We are not the same as before, but perhaps that's the point. Love changes shape. It doesn't disappear. I forgave her not to forget the past, but to free both of us from being trapped inside it. Some nights I sit on the porch with Henry, watching the lights of Cedar Falls twinkle below. The house hums with quiet laughter. The garden sways in the wind, and I feel peace settle deep in my bones. It took me a lifetime to learn that forgiveness and independence can live in the same heart. If my story teaches anything, I hope it's this. You can lose everything, your home, your certainty, even the people you love, and still find yourself standing in the ruins, planting something new. Because home isn't where you're kept safe, it's where you finally learn to keep yourself. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support helps keep these voices alive, and if you are ready for another powerful journey, click the story appearing on your screen right now. See you in the next life story with love and respect.